Bright QT. Every student matters.
Hi students, welcome to the session. In this session, we are going to talk about different kinds of habitats and the adaptations and habits of different animals, right? And obviously the plants. So we are going to talk about the habitats that we have already learned. We know that there are basically two types of habitats. One is the terrestrial habitat, right? This is the habitat that is the land habitat, right? It belongs to the animals who live on the land, whereas the other one is the aquatic habitat, right? Within the terrestrial habitat itself, because of the different climate and different terrain, that means the different landscape of earth, the terrestrial habitat is divided into various parts, right? So first we saw about the deserts, right? Then we have the mountains, right? And so on. There are different kinds of the habitats that belong to the terrestrial type, right? So one by one we are going to pick up these habitats and we are going to discuss about the features and the behavior changes that are there in the animals and the plants that are living in these habitats, right? So let's start by understanding the terrestrial habitats. Students, terrestrial habitats are the habitats which are land habitats basically. That means the animals and plants that live on land are actually living in the terrestrial habitats. There are different kinds depending on the climate and the landscape, right? So depending on these two factors, there are different kinds of habitats that we are going to study. The very first habitat that we are going to study is your desert habitats. In the desert, we have seen that there is one particular animal that we discussed about, and that was camel. And we saw that the camel had various behavioral changes as well as different adaptations which helped it to survive in the desert. The very first thing that we are going to discuss in this is the climate and the landscape of the desert. So we know that desert is dry, right? As in there is very little rainfall and it is hot, right? So the climate is dry and hot. So during the day, the climate reaches up to a very high temperature and it's very hot for the animals to come out. Now understand this, when we talked about camel, we saw that there were provisions in the body of the camel to protect it from the sun, right? Also because of the dryness, that means the less quantity of the water that is available in this particular habitat, camel had various other features. Now let's see whether or not all the other animals that are living in the desert, they have the similar features, or what kind of other adaptations or behavioral changes we see in these animals. Understand this, student, that like camel, these animals also need to protect themselves from the heat, as well as they have to conserve their energy. Also they need to cope with the dry environment, right? So let's see, first of all let's understand that there are various kinds of snakes that are present in this desert habitat, as well as there are rats which are there. Now if you look at the body structure of the snakes and the rats, you will see like unlike camel, they do not have long legs, right? In camels we saw that the camels had long legs to protect its body from this heated sand, right? In the case of snakes and rats, this is not the case. So usually what happens is that these kind of animals do not come out during the day. During the day, what they do is they stay in their burrows, right? Like this, these burrows are dug, these animals dig these burrows deep down below the surface of the soil, because over here the temperature is really high, right? So at the surface the sand is really hot, and during the day these animals stay in their burrows, right? So over here the temperature is cooler than the surface of the earth, right? So in this particular habitat we see that snakes and rats stay in burrow during the morning, stay in burrows, right, in the morning, or rather in daytime, whereas during the night they come out, right? So why is that so? Because the night is cooler in the desert environment. So they come out during night, right? So in this way they hope this particular adaptation or behavior change rather helps them in avoiding the high temperature during the day. Now, as camel, these animals also can stay without water for a very long time, and usually the water they require, in some cases there are specific kind of rats which take the water that they require from the food they eat, right? So again their body is adapted to the dry environment. So you can see how they are able to cope with this kind of environment where the weather is really hot and there is very less water, that is scarcity of water. Right. So this is about the animals, right? We have already talked about the camel, that is the ship of the desert. We also talked about other animals like snakes and rats. Now let's talk about the plants that are found in the desert habitats. Before we do so, let's do an activity, perform an activity, and with this activity we will be able to understand as to how the plants in the desert adapt themselves, right? So this is a very simple activity. You've already done this in chapter number 7. So what you're going to do over here is, like you did that, take a potted plant, right, and cover it with the polythene. Keep it in the sun, right? This is the activity which you did in chapter 7 already. Now this is a normal plant, it is not a desert plant. On the other hand, take cactus, right? So we know that cactus is a desert plant, right? And similarly what you do is put it in the sun and cover it with a polythene. Keep it as such for the whole day and observe. So you will find that there are a lot of water droplets in this plant which is not from the desert, whereas the cactus do not have these water droplets. The reason is that the desert plant do not lose water because of transpiration, right? So we know that losing of water vapor from the plant body is called as transpiration. So in cactus no such technique is there. We see that cactus do not lose water because it does not have that kind of excess water, right? So whatever water it has to be utilized for the survival purposes, right? Whereas in the case of other land plants, you will see that transpiration is there. Now, apart from this, what else is there? So, when we talk about plants, we know that plants are stationary. That means they will not be able to move from one place to the other. So, one thing which they need to do is conserve water, right? So, how do these plants conserve water? Let's understand that. So, first of all, very little water is lost through transpiration. So, we can write down very little water is lost through transpiration. So we know that transpiration happens because of your stomata that is present on the leaves, right? So transpiration happens on the leaves. Now if you look at this cactus over here, you will not find leaves on it, right? So how does this transpiration is avoided? So leaves in the desert plant are either absent or they are very small, right? Or they have converted into spines, right? So leaves have transformed into spines. So because of that, the transpiration does not take place. We know that transpiration specifically occurs from the leaf. So in the case of desert plant, to avoid this, the leaves are first of all absent, they are very small and they have been converted into spines, right? So this change, this particular adaptation helps them to reduce the loss of water through transpiration. Now you will observe that this particular structure which looks green, right? This green structure is actually the stem of the cactus plant, right? So the photosynthesis occurs in the stem, right? So the green structure, wherever you will find this green structure, is actually the stem, right? Over here you can see that this structure is the stem. It is green and performs photosynthesis because the leaves have been converted into the spines, or they are absent. Apart from that, you must have seen that if you if you feel the stem of a cactus, you will find that cactus stem is very smooth, right? So the reason is that it has a thick waxy coating, right? So what does it have? It has a thick waxy coating to further reduce any kind of loss of water, right? This waxy coating actually differs the water from being lost from the body, right? So this is the change that is occurring on the part which is above the ground. Now if we talk about the roots, so roots actually go very deep, right? So roots are very deep, right? The reason is that these roots extend down to wherever the water source is, right? So the root of the cactus grow very deep in the search of water. So in this way we see that how there have been changes in the behavior of the animals, changes in their body. Similarly, we saw the changes that are there in the plants because of the desert climate, right? To accommodate, to survive and thrive in these kind of climates. All these changes, students, are usually depending on the climate of a particular area, that how the animals and the plants will cope with that particular climate, right? Some of the climates like desert are quite harsh, and that's why the adaptations are also quite drastic, right? So in this way we saw how the animals and plants are adapted in the desert habitats. Mountain ranges. Now mountain ranges, students, are, you must have visited these mountain ranges, and you must have seen that these regions are usually cold, right? Apart from being cold, these regions are also windy, and sometimes on high altitudes you will also experience snowfall, right? So these conditions again are quite extreme, and during the winters the temperature goes really low, right? And also when there is snowfall, the temperature goes really low and becomes really cold. So the animals and plants living in these regions have adapted themselves to preserve their warmth, right? When we talk about the animals, what they need to do is they need to they need to preserve from the cold. And when we talk about the plants, so you must have seen these kind of plants which are very unique, and these kind of plants are usually seen in the mountain regions. I'm pretty sure all of you must have visited one or the other the hill stations during your summer vacations, and you must have observed the plants which look something like that. Now the very first thing which you observe in these plants are the shape, right? So you will find the shape is cone, right? So this cone shape actually helps these plants to preserve and to safeguard themselves from this kind of environment, right? Also, if you notice, the leaves are needle shaped, right? Now, as I said, the temperature is cold, it is windy, and also there is rainfall and snowfall in these regions. So the cone shape actually helps them in sliding off the snow and water from their body, right? So cone shaped does not allow the snow and water to remain on the body of these plants, right? So the cone shape helps in way that snow and rain and water, right, slide off, right? So because of this, what happens is, because the snow and water gets it slides off the body of the plant. First of all, the temperature of the plant does not go beyond what it can operate on. Apart from that, this snow and this snow which might have covered the leaves, that also falls off, and leaves are able to perform photosynthesis. If suppose the leaf were like large in this way and there was snow covering the leaf, what would happen? That the leaf won't be able to perform the photosynthesis and the plant might eventually die. So because of the needle shape and the cone shape, right, specifically because of the cone shape of the plant or the tree, what happens is that the snow slides off, right? Then to preserve itself against the windy environment, the leaves are needle shaped, right? So leaves are needle shaped, right? The reason again is that suppose if the leaf were like quite big, what would happen that when the wind blows, what will happen, it will strike these leaves and this will cause harm. Whereas if the leaves are like a needle, what will happen, they provide less surface area and the wind will pass through it, right? So in this way what we see is that this particular adaptation, that is the needle shaped leaf, is quite helpful in preserving the plants against the windy environment of the mountain regions. Now, apart from these cone-shaped plants, you might also see that there are trees of different kinds, or rather different kinds of trees are also observed, like your deodar, right? All of these trees are definitely present on the mountain ranges, but they have their own adaptations to deal with this environment, right? To deal with the cold and the windy environment. Right, so these were the adaptations of a plant or a tree in these mountain regions. If we talk about the animals, they have their own specific adaptations. First of all, the very first thing which they need to conserve themselves against is the cold environment, right? So because of this, suppose if they do not have provisions to save themselves from these kind of environments, what will happen? That these animals will eventually become so cold that they will get hypothermic and they will die, right? So to avoid themselves and so that they can operate in these environments, they have a fat layer, and what they have is thick layer of hair and fur, right? So first thing that they have is the fat layer, and apart from that they also have thick hair or fur, right? So both of these provisions are, or both of these adaptations are to save themselves from cold, right? So that their body remains warm as these provisions are made, right? So apart from the fat layer, they also have thick skin. All of these are present to protect themselves from the cold. Now, if you look at the yak, right? So yak has long and thick hair, whereas when we talk about the snow leopard, right? Snow leopard is the kind of leopard which we find on the mountain regions. You will find that the snow leopard has thick fur, and this thick fur is not only limited to its body, the thick fur is also on its paws, right? So we see thick fur also on its paws so that it is able to walk on this snow easily, right? Without its paws getting frozen, right? So because of this reason, the thick fur is also present on the paws, right? So in this way, these animals protect themselves from the cold environment and to keep themselves warm, right? Now, when we talk about the terrain, that means the landscape of the mountain regions, these landscapes are usually made up of rocks, right? And these are quite undulating. That means these are, so there are lots of slopes, and then there are lots of places where there are very difficult rocks. And if you look at the animals which are living on the plain surfaces, you will find that these animals will not be able to climb these rocks. But this particular animal, that is the mountain goat, has a very strong hoof, right? So this is a mountain goat, and the speciality or the unique feature of this goat is that it is able to climb these rocks pretty easily in the search of food, right? You can see that there are certain green grasses over here, and to eat this particular grass, these goats can climb these rocks, and they can also move on the slopes of the mountain ranges. The reason is that these slopes, these mountain goats have very strong hooves which allow them to run on these rocky terrains, right? So as you can see in this goat also, you will find that it has a thick fur, right? Again, you can see that there is thick fur on the goat to protect itself from the cold environment. Now, if you look at the snow leopard, and I'm pretty sure all of you must have seen the leopard that is on the plain. So you will find this particular animal is a little more fluffy because of the feather, whereas the snow leopard of the plain does not have so much of fur, right? Again, please remember, students, that animals try to protect themselves from extreme environments. In the deserts, we saw there were provisions of them to keep their body cool, whereas in the case of mountain regions where there is a lot of snowfall and there is the temperature goes really low, the provisions are for them to save themselves from the cold and keep their body warm. So in this way, we see that there are different adaptations on the mountain regions. These are certain examples. You can look at more of the animals that live on these regions, and you will find similarities as well as differences between these animals, and you will be able to appreciate how these adaptations are very different from the adaptations of the desert environment.